She knew she couldn't spill this coffee, but she had no idea that a single drop on the CEO's desk would be the reason he'd first try to destroy her, and then give her a fortune. If you believe dignity can't be bought, and justice sometimes finds the most unexpected paths, subscribe to our channel and let us know in the comments. Have you ever faced a situation where a small accidental act led to huge consequences? It all began with the coffee. Not just any coffee, but a ritual, a sacrament that defined the morning at Innovate Dynamics. This was a $100 a cup brew, a rare varietal called Volcano's Tear, sourced from a single remote slope in Ethiopia, roasted via a proprietary process, and brewed at precisely 93.6 degrees Celsius. This coffee was destined for one man, Julian Croft, the CEO, a man whose soul was as cold and precise as the algorithms his multi-billion-dollar empire ran on. And the mission of delivering this caffeinated holy grail from the 50th floor kitchen to his sterile 51st floor office fell every day to Elena. She was 34 years old and she was a cleaner, a ghost in a gray uniform whose job was to be invisible, erasing all traces of the existence of those who dwelled on this glass and steel Olympus. That morning, the tray in her hands trembled slightly, not from fear of Julian, but from sheer bone-deep exhaustion. Her 8-year-old son, Leo, had spent another night in the hospital. His small heart was failing, and the doctors had delivered a verdict. He needed an urgent experimental surgery. The cost, $40,000. A sum that, to the inhabitants of this building, was a rounding error in the corporate party budget. But for Elena, it was an insurmountable wall separating her son from life. She entered Julian's office. It resembled an operating theater, white minimalism, panoramic windows overlooking a choking city, and a vast desk carved from a single slab of obsidian, black and cold as deep space. Julian himself sat with his back to her, his silhouette a tense, dark line against the morning sky. He was on a conference call, his voice devoid of emotion, as if generated by a machine. Fire them, the entire department. I don't need people who allow for a 0.1% margin of error. There is no room for sympathy in this business, only results. Elena froze, her own heart clenching at the coldness of his words. She approached the desk, trying to move silently, a shadow gliding across the polished floor. She placed the porcelain cup on a special heated coaster, and in that moment, her hand faltered. A single dark drop escaped the rim of the saucer and landed on a stack of pristine white documents next to the cup. The drop was tiny, almost invisible, but in this sterile world, it was like an ink blot on a flawless reputation, a small human error in a kingdom of machines. Julian swiveled slowly in his futuristic chair. His eyes, gray and cold as a winter sea, focused on the drop. He didn't yell. He didn't raise his voice. He just looked at it. And that look was more terrifying than any scream. It was filled with contempt, a cold, analytical disdain for imperfection. "What is this?" he asked, his voice quiet, almost a whisper, but it rang with the sharp edge of steel. "I'm sorry, sir. I accidentally—" Elena stammered, her hands turning to ice, the blood draining from her face. He rose. Tall, dressed in a perfectly tailored dark gray suit, he walked to the desk and stared down at the drop, as if studying a virus under a microscope. He didn't touch the document, he pressed a button on his desk communicator. "Carol, come to my office, and call security." 30 seconds later, Carol, the head of housekeeping, a woman with a severe face and a perpetual desire to ingratiate herself with power, stood in the office, flanked by 2 impeccably dressed security guards. They didn't look at Elena, they looked at Julian, awaiting their command. "Carol," Julian began, his voice still dangerously low, "explain to me why my company employs people who are incapable of performing the simplest task without error." "This document," he gestured to the stack of papers, "is part of a $90 million contract. This drop," he glanced at Elena with disgust, "is an act of negligence that could have cost us everything." "Sir, my deepest apologies. It will never happen again," Carol chirped, shooting a look of pure venom at Elena. "She is on probation," Julian continued coldly. "Document this incident. The cost of the damaged document is $1,000. Deduct it from her salary. And if I see one more mistake, one more display of incompetence, she will be terminated without severance. Escort her out. The guard stepped toward Elena. She stood paralyzed by shame and terror. $1,000. That was almost her entire month's salary. It was the money for Leo's medication, for a single drop of coffee. She felt the weight of their gazes, Julian's, cold as ice, Carol's, filled with malicious glee, and the guards, utterly indifferent. They led her from the office like a criminal. In that moment, she wasn't just a cleaner. She was a rounding error, a glitch in the system that had just been valued at $1,000. We've only just begun this story, but things are about to get even more intense. Stay tuned to find out how the heroine deals with something she wasn't even supposed to see. Let us know in the comments if you think the punishment was fair or an act of corporate cruelty. The following days became a personal hell for Elena. News of the coffee stain incident spread through the floors like wildfire. The other housekeeping staff, who once shared tired smiles with her, now avoided her gaze. She had become a walking cautionary tale, a symbol of how easily one could fall from the already low rungs of the corporate ladder. Carol turned Elena's life into a public flogging. She followed Elena on her rounds, checking every wiped surface with a white glove, timing her bathroom cleanings with a stopwatch, making snide remarks about her lack of focus. It was a methodical, cold, systemic humiliation, sanctioned from the very top. Elena felt like a hunted animal, but the thought of Leo made her clench her jaw and endure. Meanwhile, her son's condition worsened. The doctors at the public hospital were adamant. The surgery was needed immediately. They had an opening in 2 weeks, but it required an advance payment of $10,000. $10,000. After the $1,000 deduction for the damaged document, Elena had next to nothing left. The desperation was a physical entity. It squeezed her chest, making it hard to breathe. She sold the few valuables she owned, her mother's thin gold chain, her late husband's old laptop. It amounted to a few $100s. She asked her few friends for loans, but their own lives were the same struggle for survival. And then, pushed to the absolute brink, she made a decision that felt like both an act of madness and her only remaining option. She would use the system against itself. The Innovate Dynamics company policy included a clause for salary advances in emergency situations. The amount was capped at $1,000. It was a drop in the ocean of her debt, but it was a drop. It was her small act of rebellion, an attempt to force the soulless machine to follow its own rules. She made an appointment with the HR department. Mr. Henderson's office was the complete opposite of Julian's. Warm wood, plush chairs, photos of a smiling family on his desk. Henderson himself was a man with a soft voice and a sympathetic gaze. Elena, stumbling over her words, her face flushed with shame, explained her request. She didn't mention her son, knowing that sympathy was a counterfeit currency here. She simply cited unforeseen family circumstances and asked for the $1,000 advance. Mr. Henderson listened with an expression of deep understanding. He nodded sympathetically, making clucking sounds of concern. Then he opened her employee file on his computer. His smile became slightly more strained. "Elena, I would love to help you," he said in his soft, cloying voice. "But unfortunately, according to company policy, employees on probation or with disciplinary actions on their record are not eligible for a salary advance." "But that action was unfair," she whispered. "Policy is policy," Henderson said, spreading his hands. His sympathetic gaze turned cold and empty. "Besides, Elena, frankly, your incident in the CEO's office, it makes us question your, let's say, suitability for an environment that requires the highest level of responsibility. Perhaps you should consider if the culture at Innovate Dynamics is a good fit for your capabilities." It was a punch to the gut. A polite, hypocritical, sympathetic, "You don't belong here." He wasn't just denying her the money, he was implying she would be fired soon. She realized this wasn't an accident. It was a system set in motion by Julian Croft. He hadn't just punished her, he had decided to erase her like a glitch in the code. Elena walked out of the office, and the fear and desperation were replaced by a cold, ringing rage. She was no longer a victim. She was a mother, cornered, and she knew she would no longer play by their rules. She would fight, not for her job, for her son's life. It's all coming to a head. What happens now is not just unexpected. It could change lives if you watch until the end. If you want to see how ordinary people find the strength to fight back against injustice, subscribe to our channel. The next day, Elena entered Julian's office with a new feeling. The fear was gone, replaced by an icy resolve. Carol, as usual, followed her, ready to document the slightest mistake. But Elena was flawless. She moved with the precision of a robot, her face an impenetrable mask. As she wiped down the massive obsidian desk, her gaze fell again on the stack of documents. The contract. But something was wrong. She had seen that document up close when Carol had shoved it in her face, pointing out her error. She had memorized its structure. And now, glancing at the top sheet, she noticed a tiny discrepancy. At the bottom of the page below a long string of numbers was a chart, and the chart was different. The image of the first document, the one with her coffee stain, flashed in her mind. She remembered where the drop had landed. It had hit the corner of the chart, and that corner was different. It was irrational, impossible, but she was certain. Being an invisible person, Elena often overheard things not meant for her ears. Snatches of conversation in hallways, hushed phone calls behind closed doors. She knew the company was on the verge of a massive top-secret merger. And she knew that Julian's right-hand man, a vice president named Marcus Vance, had been acting nervously lately, often locking himself in his office for hushed phone calls. In that instant, it all clicked into place. The document she had stained was the original. This new one was a forgery. Someone was sabotaging the deal, and her coffee drop, her crime, was the only proof that preserved the original data. The final board meeting was scheduled for that very day. The deal was about to be signed, a deal that Elena now understood would bankrupt the company. She knew what awaited her: termination, possibly a lawsuit for breaking confidentiality. But all she could see was Leo's face. She waited until Carol was distracted by a phone call. With a swift, practiced movement, she went to the wastebasket by the shredder, where irrelevant drafts were discarded. And there it was, the very sheet with her coffee stain, which Carol had theatrically thrown away that morning. Elena grabbed it, hid it under her uniform, and walked out of the office. She walked down the corridor toward the boardroom. Top executives in expensive suits rushed past her, not noticing her as always. But today she was not a shadow. She was a weapon. She reached the massive oak doors of the boardroom. A security guard blocked her path. "You can't go in there." "I need to see Mr. Croft, urgently." "He's in a meeting." Elena looked him straight in the eye, and her gaze held none of the fear of a cleaner. It held steel. "If I don't go in there right now, your boss won't have a company tomorrow." Something in her voice made the guard hesitate. It was only for a second. Elena used it and pushed the door open. 20 people around a long table stared at her. In complete silence, Julian Croft sat at the head of the table, his face contorted with fury. "Out!" he hissed, but Elena was already walking toward him. She reached the table and placed 2 sheets of paper in front of him, one pristine and ready for signing, the other crumpled with a small, dark stain. She didn't say a word. She simply pointed a finger at the chart on the clean sheet, and then at the same chart on her sheet where the coffee stain touched the corner. Julian followed her finger. His eyes widened. He grabbed both sheets, comparing them. On the face of Marcus Vance, sitting beside him, a deathly pallor spread. The room erupted into chaos. Julian shot to his feet, his face white with rage, but this time, the rage was not directed at Elena. "Security, get Vance. No one leaves this room." A week later, Elena stood in Julian's office again, but this time she was sitting in the chair opposite him. "I've reviewed everything," he said quietly. "Vance was working for our competitor. That version of the contract would have bankrupted us within a year. You saved the company." He slid open a desk drawer. "Innovate Dynamics has a policy of rewarding employees whose actions prevent catastrophic losses. The reward is calculated as a percentage of the amount saved. In your case, he placed a check in front of her. Elena looked at the numbers. $40,000. This isn't a payment, Elena, Julian said, and for the first time his voice was free of its metallic edge. This is a result. You showed me a result I failed to calculate. Your attention to detail. Your honesty when you had every reason to hate me. That is an asset I cannot afford to lose. He pushed another folder toward her. This isn't an offer, it's a request. I'm creating a new department, internal audit and risk analysis. I want you to lead it because you see things others don't. You see the details in the big picture. You see the truth behind the facade. Elena looked at him, at the check, at the folder, and the tears she had held back for so long finally came. But they were not tears of sorrow or fear. They were tears of victory. A victory not over him, but over the system that had tried to break her. The drop of coffee hadn't ruined her life. It had saved it. If this story of how a drop of coffee changed everything touched your heart, share it. And subscribe so you don't miss more stories that prove a person's true value isn't in their job title.